You're listening to the Otis Jiry channel.
Chapter 18. The Walk. The little hotel was sited next to a stream, and the owner proudly informed Mark and Jane that the fountain, situated in the middle of the lawn, drew all its water from it and back again, so as to not waste the main water supply. She was a small, bustling woman with short, curly gray hair, wearing a pair of spectacles which were entirely out of proportion to her face, the blue frames bedecked with ornamental protrusions. The day before had been a great strain on both of them, and it was a pleasant relief to stand and chat leisurely on the greener than green lawn in that morning's bright sunshine. The old lady explained she was running the place by herself since her husband passed away a couple of years ago, although her ailing sister helped at weekends. The hotel stood back a considerable distance from the roadway, unusually so. Mark had arranged for Edward to phone him at the hotel if he received a vital telephone call, or back in Hampstead. Edward amazed Mark by still not asking what it was all about. Even so, Mark needed to tell him all about it as soon as the situation was resolved. Several days came and went with no word. They reckoned on it taking a while for Natasha to make the call, as she was still officially under guard. Then, if she managed to get the message through all right, there was all the preparation needed for removing the bomb. It could take weeks before we hear anything, Mark. We'll have to fly back to England if we don't hear within the next week or so. Please read a book or something to take your mind off it. Mark was pacing up and down the room like a soul in torment. I'm going out for a walk. Coming? He said. It won't be dark for at least another hour. No, you go. I'll get on with the washing. Mark smiled and went out the door, making exaggerated movements, looking up and down the corridor to see if the coast was clear. He left the hotel and trotted to the road. It was a beautiful, clear, darkening blue sky. He turned left and made his way down the roadway, which was quickly becoming a dirt track, narrowing slightly. The houses, which had been uniformly lining the road, were now thinning out, distributed in ones and twos. Finally, just a track lay ahead of him, reaching sinuously into the middle distance and into rural woodland. It was truly a beautiful evening, and he wished Jane had been with him to witness the sunset. All very romantic stuff, but he found it almost impossible to detach his thoughts from the intense anticipation he felt for the outcome of this incredible business. What would happen to Natasha when she was fit to leave the security of the police-protected hospital? Dr. Freeman didn't seem at all concerned. In fact, he hadn't even mentioned anything about the poor girl's future. It was a difficult situation for her to be in, a Russian girl, blackmailed into collaboration with the Anglo-American Secret Services, and then double-crossed, as was Nathan Fraser. Mark continued his walk into the woodland. It was so peaceful, but he couldn't help himself agonizing over the problems which could have such a profound effect on them all, especially Natasha. What, for instance, if it was discovered that the bomb had been removed? It would completely disrupt the military strategists who, using an A-bomb as the ultimate in blackmail, could use it as an almost instant first-strike capability at the 11th hour. Natasha's life would be in even more danger than it was at the moment. She wouldn't be safe anywhere. She would be in the awful situation of having to look over her shoulder for the rest of her life. Jane, Edward, and himself would all be implicated if this plot was blown wide open. My God, he thought to himself, and all because of an intervention which would have made him and his hospital famous and another first for Cambridge. Oh, how he wished he had never invented the infernal machine. As dusk closed into darkness, he was suddenly aware that he had been walking and thinking deeply about things, and was totally unaware of his whereabouts. He had automatically followed the track with his eyes lowered and was now lost. Darkness had fallen much quicker than he'd anticipated. It had passed as if it were an instant while he was deep in thought. Looking around him, he could only see vague glimmerings of light, nothing which told him it was a highway or house. A mist had risen from the meadowland around him, shrouding any evidence of landmarks, which may or may not have been any use to him. It was becoming colder as the night set in. He was aware that he had been walking easily and downwards, so deduced that the mist and meadow-like feel beneath his feet was proof enough of a river valley, shallow as it was. The sky had been clear dark blue when he set out, but the mist now hid the stars. The woodland trees he had passed through was now only evident as clumps and copses, too damp for their growth this far down the valley. Why couldn't he see the moon, he thought. It should be bright enough for him to see by, instead of this eerie twilight. He had little light of any sort to guide him and couldn't make out the time on his watch. In sudden shivers of desperation, he had even thought of somehow breaking the glass watch to allow him to feel the delicate hands of the watch, but everywhere around was soft and wet, with no stone or rocks to crack the glass. Mark was intensely angry with himself for allowing this predicament to have arisen at all. It was stupid of him not to have turned back as dusk had fallen, but he had been simply unaware of the gradual change of light in the environment. He now had no idea of the time as he walked into patches of shallow water. He tried to sense which way was up and back out of the valley. He wasn't a good swimmer and feared falling into deeper water if he wandered too close to the river, if indeed a river existed. Perhaps it was just a very damp meadow, and the river only existed in his imagination. Images of Jane flashed in his mind, then Helen, then Natasha. They were all important to him in their different ways. He shook his head and rubbed his eyes as the images seemed to fuse together, as if he was watching a recording of his own dream, the faces blurring into one, just as the images of the rail coach and aircraft windows had fused in the recording of Fraser's mind during REM. At last, someone was there. He called out loudly with relief flushing through him. He called again and again. Nothing. He had obviously made a mistake. He hadn't actually seen anyone, or anything for that matter. There! He heard the same sound again. He hadn't imagined it at all. The quick splashing sound of someone running through the mire towards him. He would soon be safe and warm. Mark strained his eyes in the direction of the approaching sound. Closer. Closer. It was upon him. Nothing. He thought he must be hallucinating. He listened to the sound repeat itself again and again. It now meant nothing to him because he had decided it wasn't real, but still, instinctively, he moved to one side as the sound came upon him, flinching. He had to sit down soon. He was close to exhaustion. He stopped trying to move on. Standing ankle-deep in water, he just listened. The sound of splashing footsteps continued unabated as he stood there in the misty darkness of God knows where. Then, as mysteriously as they had begun, the sound of the splashing footsteps stopped. All was quiet, utterly soundless now, except for the booming of his heart, pounding his brain as if to be let into it for its own safety within. When he made contact with a tree of some sort, where the water felt to be only an inch or two deep, he embraced it while standing and let his hand slide down to the cold water. He sat at the bole of the tree, at least it was something solid and real, a part of reality which wouldn't move. He propped his back up against the sturdy tree, and now, soaking wet, he lapsed into unconsciousness. Coughing and sputtering rudely made him aware of his senses once more, not that they had told him much over the hours which must have passed. Had he fallen into a river and was drowning? He pulled his head upright, still sitting. He had slipped over to one side, his face entering the water. The tree was still there. He made that much out with his numbed hands. He remained sufficiently upright to grab some kind of sleep through the rest of the demon night, partly reawakening from time to time for a minute or so. At these times he decided he was dead. He felt totally cold and numb, and now nothing mattered, allowing him to relax his mind enough to drop back into a fitful slumber. He again partly surfaced from unconsciousness to make out that something was different. His head was above a sea of mist, as the light of dawn allowed him to see. He still didn't know if he was dead or not. No feeling came from his body, and the surreal atmosphere of his surroundings unnerved him. He thought he saw people in the mist. Perhaps these were people who had died and had entered this strange dimension as he had done. There was Jane. He was certain of it. "Over here! I'm over here!" he yelled. She appeared to move on past him, not seeing him at all. Helen was there. He could just make her out. She was not close to Jane. Perhaps she didn't know she was there. Mark blinked into the early morning hazy sunshine, trying to make out further people in the mist. Two men came into view, looking down into the mist and moving their heads from side to side, as if searching for something on the ground. One had a gun. He cowered down against the safety of the tree below the mist line when he recognized the pair as Grant and Craig. How could all these people be here at once when he was lost? They must be looking for him. He must be dreaming. He reasoned that he knew too much and had to be eliminated. How could he have kidded himself that he wouldn't have been followed? And now he was trapped. Jane and Helen, they must have told the thugs the direction he had gone. That's why Jane declined to walk with him, he reasoned. He held his head in his hands and pulled at his dank hair. He further realized that the whole of the conversation he had with Natasha was on tape. The secret was out, and the bomb wouldn't be removed at all. But Jane couldn't have been the informer. But if she was, how could he ever trust another human being again? How could all these people suddenly be surrounding him but not seeing him? He plainly could see them. If they had managed to track him down to within a few meters, they must see him, surely. Mark's mind was twisting itself inside out, trying to work out the truth of what had actually happened. Since things didn't quite appear to be real and had a sort of ethereal quality about them, it could mean he was dead, and that there was some kind of afterlife which allowed him to reason up to a point. The morning sun shone more brightly now. Mark rubbed his eyes, wondering where all the people he had seen had disappeared to. He squinted up past the rising sun, immediately facing him, to try to make out the branches of the tree which had been the one reality he had clung to, which may have saved his life from a watery grave if he was indeed still alive. He blinked and blinked again. Why was his mind playing tricks with him? Was he truly in a twilight afterlife, or alive in some bizarre, surreal game? Perhaps he had been drugged by Jane, a game to drive him mad so that whatever he might say will never be believed. As he again looked up at the branches of this tree, he shielded his eyes from a terrific brightness. The branches were in the form of a cover above him, changing into a brilliant cloud, a cloud in the characteristic form of a mushroom. He screamed. It had happened. He was a part of the demonic image. He was embracing the rising thermionic core as if a parent guiding its offspring. He felt the hot flow between his arms and hands. He must separate himself from this evil flow. Pulling harder and harder, he could not release his hold. A part of his crazed mind needed to hold on to the security of the tree's trunk as his only perceived link with reality, but which was no more. A part of him desperately needed to release it, to be exorcised from this evil, arboreal apparition. A voice penetrated his mind, perhaps another part of himself telling him what to do. "I can't! I can't let go!" he screamed, clamping his arms tightly around the trunk-like core. "You can, and you must release," came back an order. He felt as two people, one good and the other evil, both hearing voices, imagining hearing voices. What was the truth? He felt himself crying uncontrollably. He wanted to let go, if that was the right thing to do. How could he know? His energy was all but spent, and his arms shuddered as he fought to release his hold, his whole body in torment as his hands and arms slid away from what? Security or guilt? He couldn't tell. He didn't know. It no longer mattered.